I knew something was wrong the moment they locked the conference room door while I was still inside. No one raised their voice. No one looked me in the eye. There was just the soft, deliberate click of metal sliding into place, quiet enough to be polite, loud enough to be unmistakable. In that instant, I understood something essential. I had not been forgotten. I had been excluded. I was 59 years old. I had given 32 years of my life to that company, 20 of those years as senior legal director. I had built the internal compliance department from nothing but a folding table and borrowed staff. I had stayed past midnight more times than I could count defending the company from lawsuits that would have destroyed it. I had sacrificed weekends, anniversaries, even the final year of my husband's life, telling myself it was temporary, necessary. That morning I arrived early for the year-end strategy meeting as I always did. I carried my leather notebook edges worn smooth by decades of use and the fountain pen my husband Paul had given me on our 20th anniversary. I had no idea it would be the last time I carried either of them into that room. When the meeting ended, everyone stood. Mark, the newly appointed deputy chief executive, younger than my daughter by a few years, smiled and said, "The board needed a private discussion." Richard, my boss for more than a decade, wouldn't meet my gaze. The human resources manager gathered her papers too quickly. I stayed seated, assuming I would be called back in. The door closed. I stood, walked to the door, turned the handle. Locked. I knocked once, then again, louder. Nothing. I sat back down slowly, heart pounding, but my mind oddly clear. I had felt this before. That quiet dismissal. That subtle signal that your presence was no longer required. After nearly half an hour, the door opened. Mark entered with the human resources manager. Richard did not. Linda, Mark said gently, as if speaking to someone fragile. "The company is evolving. We're moving toward a younger, more dynamic leadership structure." The words were polished, rehearsed. "We believe this is the right time for you to step back and enjoy some rest," the HR manager added, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "An early retirement package. Very generous." Generous. A beautiful word to hide betrayal. I did not argue. I did not ask why. I signed. Not because I was defeated, but because I knew something they did not. Retreat is sometimes the first move in a much longer game. Outside, rain fell in thin, cold lines. I sat in my car without starting the engine. My phone vibrated. A message from my daughter, Emily. "Mom, are you free? I need to talk." Emily was 36, married, 2 children. She rarely called unless she needed help with childcare or money. I texted back, "I can come by tonight." A pause. "Actually, tonight might not work. Jake's parents are over. Maybe another time." Another gentle exclusion, another closed door. I drove home to the large suburban house Paul and I had bought decades earlier. The house I now lived in alone. That evening, I sat in the living room with the television on and sound off, watching reflections instead of images. Work had erased me. Family had sidelined me. Not out of cruelty, but convenience. I realized something chilling. I was not hated. I was considered unnecessary. That night, I made a quiet decision. I would not beg to be seen. I would let them feel what it meant to lose me. I opened my laptop and typed one name into the search bar. Claire Morrison, the attorney I had once protected from termination years ago. I pressed call. 3 days after my forced retirement, I sat across from Claire Morrison in her office overlooking the Hudson River. She was sharp, composed, and impossible to intimidate. A woman who had survived enough corporate warfare to recognize betrayal on sight. "They handled it cleanly," she said, reviewing my paperwork. "Legally sound, but strategically suspicious." "I don't want to sue," I told her. "I want to know why." Claire looked up. "You think there's more?" "I know there is," I said. "Mark didn't have the authority to remove me without cause, and Richard wouldn't have allowed it unless something compelled him." Claire nodded. "Then we investigate." I left her office with purpose for the first time in weeks. That evening, Emily called again. "Mom, I'm sorry about the other night. Things have been stressful. Jake's company isn't doing well." "I understand," I said. There was hesitation in her voice. "We might need some help. Just a short-term loan." I closed my eyes. "Mom," she pressed, "are you okay?" "I lost my job," I said. Silence. "Why didn't you tell me?" "You didn't ask," I replied calmly. She changed the subject quickly, asked about money again. "I can't help," I said. "But you always—" "I won't," I interrupted gently. "Not because I can't, because you need to stand without me." After the call, I reviewed my finances. Something caught my attention. A recurring account transfer. Beneficiary Emily Carter. Authorized by Richard. My breath slowed. I called Claire immediately. "They used me," I said. "My position, my name." "And your family," Claire replied quietly. I stared at the screen. That night, I opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote, They think I'm finished. I will let them discover the cost of that mistake. And for the first time in a long while, I felt steady. This was only the beginning. The first thing I learned was how easy it is to underestimate a woman people have already dismissed. Claire worked quietly. She didn't storm offices or threaten lawsuits. She requested documents. She asked questions that sounded harmless. She let people talk. Men like Mark always talked too much when they thought they were safe. Within a week, patterns emerged. Mark's promotion had been rushed. His contract amendments were approved during a board subcommittee meeting I had not been invited to attend for the first time in my career. That alone was suspicious. Then there were the consulting fees, large ones, paid to an outside firm with no clear deliverables. Claire slid a printed report across her desk. This consulting firm, she said, tapping the page, exists mostly on paper. 2 employees, both former classmates of Mark's. I felt a slow tightening in my chest. Money laundering. Not exactly, she said. More like extraction. Corporate funds redirected under the guise of innovation. And Richard, Claire's expression darkened. Richard signed off on everything, but not voluntarily. She turned the screen toward me. An email chain appeared. Richard's tone was panicked, defensive, afraid. Mark had leverage. Something tied to a decision Richard made years ago. A settlement quietly paid. A clause buried deep. A conflict of interest never disclosed. They forced him, Claire said, and you were collateral. I leaned back, absorbing it. 32 years of loyalty erased not because I failed, but because I was inconvenient. That night, I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car in the parking garage, engine off, lights dim, thinking about Emily, about the transfers, about Richard's authorization. It wasn't generosity, it was insurance. I called Emily the next morning. She sounded cheerful, relieved to hear from me. Mom, I was worried. I need to ask you something, I said, and I want the truth. A pause. Okay, did Richard ever offer to help you financially? Silence stretched. Emily. Yes, she said finally. He said it was part of an employee support initiative, that he owed you and wanted to help your family. And you didn't think to tell me. I thought you knew, she said quickly. I assumed it was your idea. It wasn't anger I felt then, it was clarity. They hadn't just erased me at work. They had bypassed me at home. That afternoon, I went through my will. It hadn't been updated since Paul died. I read every clause slowly, as if seeing my life from the outside. I made changes. Not out of spite, out of necessity. When Claire called later that evening, her voice was steady but sharp. Linda, we have confirmation. The consulting firm is collapsing. One of the partners is cooperating. Good, I said. There's more, she added. Mark is panicking. He started moving assets. Then it's time, I replied. For what? To stop being quiet. That night, I opened my notebook again and wrote a second line beneath the first. They thought I was invisible. They forgot what I built. Mark called me 2 days later. He sounded surprised, I answered. Linda, he said warmly, I heard you were settling into retirement. I'm busy, I replied. I wanted to check in, make sure there are no hard feelings. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Why would there be? A pause. Well, you know how transitions can feel. I do, I said. Very educational. He laughed nervously. Listen, I'm hosting a small gathering this weekend. Just colleagues. A farewell of sorts. It would mean a lot if you came. I understood immediately. He wanted optics. My presence would legitimize his position. Silence would suggest consent. I'll be there, I said. The gathering was held at a sleek penthouse downtown. Glass walls, city lights. The kind of place meant to intimidate. I arrived alone. Mark froze when he saw me. Not because of my clothes or posture, but because of my calm. People who rely on chaos fear composure. Richard was there. He looked older, smaller. When our eyes met, he looked away. The room filled with laughter and clinking glasses. Mark gave a speech about innovation and the future. He thanked mentors. He did not mention me. When the applause faded, I raised my glass. I'd like to say something, I said. The room quieted. I spent 32 years at this company, I continued. And I'm proud of what I built, especially the systems that ensured accountability. Mark stiffened. I believe in transparency, I said. So I want to thank those who recently reminded me how vital it is. I turned toward Richard. Some lessons arrived late. Richard's face drained of color. And some, I added, looking at Mark, arrived publicly. I set my glass down. The board will be receiving a full report on Monday. Financial irregularities, unauthorized transfers, conflicts of interest. A murmur rippled through the room. Mark stepped forward. Linda, this isn't the place. It's exactly the place, I said quietly. You locked me out of a room because you thought I was finished. You were wrong. I picked up my coat. I hope you enjoy the view, I said to Mark. It doesn't last. I left without waiting for a response. On Monday, the board meeting was emergency only. By Tuesday, Mark was suspended. By Friday, the story leaked. And by Sunday, Emily called me crying. "Mom," she said, voice shaking. "People are saying things. About Richard, about money." "Yes," I said, "they are." "Did you do this?" I thought of the locked door, the quiet exclusion. "I told the truth," I replied. "What people do with it is their choice." Silence followed. Then she asked softly, "Are you still my mother?" I closed my eyes. "I always was," I said. "The question is whether you ever saw me." And for the first time, she didn't answer right away. Emily didn't call back that night. I sat alone at my kitchen table, a single lamp on the rest of the house dark. The silence felt heavier than anger. Anger at least makes noise. Silence is where consequences settle. The news cycle moved fast, but not fast enough to outrun the truth. By Monday morning, Mark's name was everywhere inside the company. Emails flew, meetings were canceled, the consulting firm was officially under investigation. Richard had taken an indefinite medical leave, the corporate phrase people use when someone is being quietly removed before they can resign. Claire called me just after noon. "They're unraveling," she said. "Faster than I expected." "I'm not surprised," I replied. "They built everything on the assumption that I wouldn't push back." "They underestimated you," Claire said. "No," I corrected. "They erased me. That's worse." She paused. "There's something else you should know. The board wants to meet with you." I felt a flicker of something old. Validation. Then I extinguished it. "For what purpose?" I asked. "They want your cooperation. They're positioning you as the moral center of the narrative. The woman who uncovered corruption and restored integrity." I let out a quiet laugh. "Convenient. They're offering a consulting role. Temporary, public-facing." "No," I said immediately. Claire hesitated. "Linda, this could be powerful leverage." "I don't need leverage," I replied. "I need distance." After we hung up, I walked through my house slowly. The framed photos, Paul smiling on a beach years ago, Emily at graduation. The children when they were younger, faces still soft, still unguarded. I realized something uncomfortable. I had been indispensable to everyone and essential to no one. That evening, Emily finally called. Her voice was raw. "Mom, Jake lost his job today." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry." "He says it's because of the company scandal, that investors pulled out, that everything's collapsing." I said nothing. "People are asking questions," she continued, "about the money, about why Richard was sending it to me." "And what are you telling them?" I asked. "That I didn't know," she whispered. "Which is true, but they don't believe me." This was the moment she expected me to rescue her, to explain, to absorb the damage. "I won't lie for you," I said gently, "but I won't accuse you either." "So what do I do?" she asked, panic rising. "You sit with the discomfort," I replied, the same way I did for years. She started to cry. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know," I said, "but intent doesn't erase impact." There was a long pause. "Are you going to cut me off?" she asked quietly. I thought of my revised will, of the changes I had made with steady hands. "No," I said, "but things will be different." After the call, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my notebook. For the first time, I didn't write about revenge. I wrote about boundaries. The board meeting took place without me. That alone told me everything I needed to know. They issued a public statement praising my years of service, condemning recent leadership failures, and announcing an internal restructuring. Mark was formally terminated. Richard resigned 2 days later. No one asked me back, and that strangely felt like freedom. Claire and I met for lunch at a quiet restaurant near the river. No paperwork, no strategy. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I think so," I said. "I'm just not sure what comes next." "You could write," she suggested, "or teach, or sit on boards." "Or do nothing," I said. She smiled. "You've earned that too." As we talked, my phone buzzed, a text from an unfamiliar number. "This is Daniel Harper. I'm not sure you remember me. We served on a nonprofit board together years ago. I heard what happened. Would you be willing to talk?" I stared at the message. Daniel had been one of the few men in leadership who had listened to me without defensiveness, who had taken notes when I spoke. I replied, "I remember, and yes." That conversation turned into another, and then another. Within weeks, I was quietly advising 2 nonprofit organizations on governance and ethics. No titles, no press releases, just work that mattered. Emily visited me one afternoon unannounced. She looked smaller, older. The confidence she'd worn so easily before was gone. "I don't want money," she said immediately. I need to understand." We sat across from each other like strangers learning a shared language. "I thought you'd always be there," she admitted. "No matter what. I didn't realize how much I was leaning on you." "I was there," I said. "I just stopped carrying everything alone." She nodded slowly. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't fix it," I replied. "You rebuild it, piece by piece, with honesty." She reached for my hand. I let her. That night after she left, I stood by the window and looked out at the dark street. I had imagined revenge would feel explosive. Instead, it felt quiet, precise, like setting a bone that had been broken for years. They thought locking me out would end my story. All it did was move it somewhere they could no longer control. And for the first time since Paul died, I wasn't reacting to loss. I was choosing what came next. The subpoena arrived on a Thursday morning, folded inside an unmarked envelope, and slid through my mail slot like an accusation. I knew it was coming. Claire had warned me that once federal investigators followed the money far enough, they would circle back to me, not because I was guilty, but because I was central. I had been there for everything. My signature was on policies, procedures, oversight, frameworks. I was the architecture they had used and then tried to bury. I sat at my kitchen table, the paper trembling slightly in my hands, and felt the old instinct rise, the one that said, "Be careful, be quiet, don't make this worse." Then I felt something else, newer, stronger. I called Claire. "They want testimony," I said. "I know," she replied, "and you're ready." I wasn't sure that I was, but I agreed. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, a closed session. No cameras, no public statements, just a long table, government attorneys and men who suddenly remembered my name after years of pretending they'd forgotten it. Mark was already cooperating. That didn't surprise me. Men like him always fold when the spotlight gets hot enough. Richard had lawyered up and gone silent. I spent the weekend preparing, not memorizing facts. I didn't need to. The truth was already organized inside me. What I practiced was restraint. How to answer only what was asked, how not to soften my words, how not to rescue anyone who had not rescued me. Emily called the night before the hearing. "I heard about the subpoena," she said. "Are you scared?" "Yes," I answered honestly, "but not of the truth." She hesitated. "I want to come with you tomorrow." "No," I said gently. "This is something I need to do alone." She understood. I could hear it in her silence. The hearing room was colder than necessary. Institutional cold, designed to keep emotions out and compliance in. I took my seat, folded my hands, and waited. They asked about policies. I explained them. They asked about oversight failures. I named them. They asked about Richard. I did not defend him. And then finally one of the attorneys leaned forward. "Why didn't you speak up sooner?" The question hung in the air, loaded, accusatory. "Because I believed in loyalty," I said. "And because I believed that being useful would protect me." "Did it?" he asked. "No," I replied. "It made me expendable." No one interrupted after that. When it was over, Claire met me outside. She didn't smile. She didn't congratulate me. She just nodded. "You did exactly what you needed to do," she said. On the way home, I stopped at a park I hadn't visited since Paul died. Sat on a bench, watched winter light slip through bare branches. I realized something then. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. The first offer came quietly. A nonprofit governance board. Unpaid but influential, the kind of role that doesn't come with applause, only impact. Then another, a university ethics committee, a consulting request from a firm trying desperately not to become the next scandal. I said no to some, yes to a few. For the first time in decades, I was choosing work based on alignment instead of obligation. Emily noticed the change before I said anything. "You're different," she said one afternoon when she came by with the kids. Calmer, but also sharper. I stopped apologizing for taking up space, I told her. She nodded slowly. "I think I spent my whole life assuming you'd always shrink to make room for everyone else." "I did," I said. "That was my mistake." She swallowed. "I don't want to repeat that." Neither did I. Meanwhile, the fallout continued. Richard was formally charged. Mark disappeared from public view. The company issued another statement, this one longer, emptier. They invited me to a private reconciliation meeting. I declined. The final chapter of that story belonged to them, not me. Instead, I focused on something unexpected, a letter I'd received from a woman I didn't know. She wrote that she had watched her own career evaporate in silence after 40 years, that she had read about the scandal and recognized herself in the margins, that my refusal to disappear had given her courage to confront her own board. I read the letter twice, then I started receiving more. Women my age, older, younger, all describing the same quiet erosion, the same polite exclusions, the same shock of realizing too late that loyalty had no retirement plan. An idea began to take shape. I called Claire, then Daniel Harper, then two women I trusted from different chapters of my life. We met around my dining table, coffee growing cold as the conversation heated. What if I said carefully we created something for women like us? Like what Daniel asked. A foundation, I replied. Not for money, for visibility, for legal literacy, for power that doesn't rely on permission. They didn't laugh. They leaned in. That night, after everyone left, I stood in my living room and felt something settle into place. I had spent years proving my value to institutions that never intended to protect me. Now I would build something that did. The revenge had done its work. It had exposed rot. It had ended lies. What came next wasn't about punishment. It was about legacy. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being seen while I built it. The foundation did not begin with a launch party or a press release. It began with paperwork, quiet meetings, long conversations that circled the same question again and again. What do women like us actually need? Not motivation, not inspiration, not platitudes about resilience. We needed leverage, knowledge, protection, language. We needed to understand contracts before signing them. We needed to recognize when loyalty was being used against us. We needed to know how to document exclusion before it became erasure. We named it the second line, because most women my age had already lived one full life defined by service. This was about the line you draw after that, the one that says this is as far as you go with me. I funded the foundation myself, not extravagantly, intentionally, enough to make it real, not enough to make it fragile. Claire handled the legal structure. Daniel helped design the governance model. 2 other women joined the board, both in their 60s, both with scars no one had ever asked them about. Our first workshop was held in a borrowed conference room at a community center. I expected maybe a dozen women. 43 showed up. They sat quietly at first, coats folded in laps, purses clutched, close eyes watchful. These were women who had learned caution the hard way. I didn't give a speech. I told them the truth. I told them about the locked door, about being excluded without explanation, about discovering money had been moved around me through me without my consent, about realizing too late that being indispensable made me disposable. No dramatics, no embellishment, just facts. When I finished, the room stayed silent for a long moment. Then a woman in the front row spoke, early 60s, former operations director. They did that to me, she said quietly, almost exactly. Another voice followed, me too. Then another. Stories poured out, boardrooms, family businesses, charities, churches, places that preached loyalty while practicing control. One woman said something that stayed with me. I thought if I stayed kind, they'd stay fair. That sentence felt like a bruise. By the end of the afternoon, the room felt different, not lighter, sharper, focused. They weren't leaving empowered. They were leaving informed. That night, Emily called. I read about the foundation, she said. Someone shared a post. How did it make you feel, I asked. Proud, she admitted, then hesitated and exposed. In what way? She took a breath. I realized how often I assumed you'd absorb things, fix things, carry things I didn't want to face. I didn't rush to comfort her. That realization, I said, is the beginning of respect. The call came at dawn. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. This is Richard Hale, the voice said. I felt my spine straighten. I won't keep you long, he continued quickly. I need to speak to you privately. I considered hanging up. Then I said, you have 3 minutes. He exhaled. I never wanted it to end like this. No one ever does, I replied. They threatened me, he said. Mark did. He found the settlement, the one from years ago. I was trying to protect the company. You protected yourself, I corrected, by sacrificing me. Silence. I thought you'd understand, he said weakly. That landed harder than anger. You thought I'd understand being erased, I asked. Being locked out, being used as a firewall while you diverted money through my authority. I was afraid, he said. So was I replied. The difference is, I didn't betray anyone to save myself. His voice cracked. Is there any way to undo this? No, I said calmly. There is only a way forward, and it doesn't include me. When I hung up, my hands were steady. That surprised me. Later that day, Emily came over again. No kids this time, no distractions. I spoke to Jake, she said. We're making changes, real ones. I waited. We're selling the house, she continued. Downsizing. No more pretending we can't live without help we didn't earn. I nodded. That's yours to decide. She looked at me carefully. I want our relationship to be different too. In what way? I don't want you to rescue me, she said. I want you to choose me, when you want to. Not because you feel obligated. Something inside me softened. I can do that, I said. That evening, I reviewed my updated will one last time. Everything was deliberate now. Transparent. Honest. Not punitive, not indulgent. Balanced. I realized then that the most effective revenge I had taken wasn't exposing corruption or watching powerful men fall. It was refusing to return to the role they expected me to play. They wanted silence. I chose clarity. They wanted compliance. I chose authorship. And as the Foundation's calendar filled with workshops, consultations, and letters from women who were finally drawing their own second lines, I understood something deeply. Revenge fades, but self-respect compounds. And I was only beginning to see the returns. The anniversary crept up on me quietly. 1 year since the locked door. 1 year since I had been escorted out of a life I thought I still belonged to. I noticed it only because my calendar was full in a way it had never been before. Meetings with women I had never met yet somehow knew intimately. Emails from organizations asking for guidance before things broke instead of after. A waiting list for the second line's workshops that stretched 3 months out. Visibility had changed everything. Not because I was famous, I wasn't, but because I was no longer invisible. Emily and I had settled into something new. Not closeness born of obligation, but a steadier connection built on mutual awareness. She no longer assumed my availability. She asked. And when I said no, she accepted it without sulking or guilt. That alone felt revolutionary. One afternoon, she invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. No children, no errands disguised as bonding. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, stirring her coffee, "about how I learned what love looks like." I stayed silent. "I think I learned that love meant endurance," she continued, "that if you loved someone, you absorbed discomfort so they wouldn't have to." I nodded. "That's what I taught you, without meaning to." She looked up at me, eyes steady. "I don't want Sophie learning that." The name caught in my chest. My granddaughter, barely 3 years old, already watching the world with sharp curiosity. "I want her to see women who don't disappear," Emily said. "Women who say no without apologizing." "That's why this matters," I replied. "Not just for us, for what comes after." Later that week, the second line hosted its first closed-door retreat. No press, no donors, just 12 women over the age of 55 who had been quietly sidelined by families, corporations, institutions that smiled while pushing them out. On the final evening, we sat in a circle. No agenda. A woman named Ruth spoke last. "I thought revenge would heal me," she said softly. "I thought exposing them would make me whole." And I asked. It helped, she admitted. But what healed me was realizing I no longer need their acknowledgement. That night, alone in my hotel room, I wrote something new in my notebook. Justice isn't about being seen by those who erased you. It's about seeing yourself clearly enough to walk away. The invitation arrived in early December. A holiday dinner. Emily's home. Small, intentional. I didn't answer right away. Old versions of me would have said yes immediately, grateful to be included, afraid that hesitation might cost me my place. But I was no longer negotiating for space. I called her instead. "Is this an invitation?" I asked, "or an obligation?" She didn't hesitate. An invitation, no pressure. "Then yes," I said, "I'd like that." The night was quiet, no performance, no audience, just family conversation and an ease I hadn't felt in years. At one point, Emily raised her glass. "To my mother," she said, "for teaching me that strength doesn't always look like sacrifice." I felt tears sting, but I didn't hide them. Later, as I drove home through streets lit with soft holiday lights, I realized something profound. I had not lost a year. I had reclaimed it. The career I thought defined me had ended, but something more honest had taken its place. The family dynamic I once accepted had shifted not perfectly, but truthfully. And the women who came through the second line were doing what I once thought impossible. They were stepping forward without asking permission. I parked the car and sat for a moment, engine off, breath visible in the cold air. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been quietly excluded, overlooked, or erased after decades of giving everything you had, know this. It is not too late. Not to speak, not to draw a line, not to choose yourself. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about justice that arrives slowly, but lands hard, about women who stop shrinking and start reclaiming their power, then stay with us. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe, because the second half of your life deserves to be lived out loud.